Good morning. I'm out here in my office, away from the office on our side porch, running a couple of minutes late because our internet here at the house wasn't so hot this morning. But anyway, I'm here and hopefully our internet will last through the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. Like I've mentioned the past couple of mornings, this is simply an opportunity to develop and maintain some sense of community when we can't be together. And like I've mentioned, if you have a particular question or comment about the text that I read or what I say, just post in the comments, send me a Facebook message. This morning we're coming from Hebrews again, just like on Monday morning, and it's Hebrews chapter 12. And I hope that this is a passage which is familiar to you, and if it's not, I encourage you to make yourself familiar with it. And it reads in this way, just verses 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. I love that. And I love that passage. And it's so fitting here during Lent. If the idea of Lent is to push things aside so that we can focus on what's most important, then this passage is so appropriate. And we throw everything aside. That's the point of giving stuff up for Lent, fasting from this or that for Lent, so that we can focus on what's most important, which would be Christ. And not Paul, we don't know who wrote Hebrews, gives us this wonderful analogy of a race where we are, the Christian life is a race, we're told. I think that too commonly we tend to have this idea that all of Christian life is subsumed in the one moment where we profess our faith, whether that be when we're baptized or confirmation or some other time, that the whole point of the Christian life is that one moment. That one moment is the starting point, it's essential, but it's not everything. Everything that comes after that is important. Everything that comes after that is important. The Christian life has a starting point and it has an end. So it's a race. And every step along the way, and so you have this this imagery of running a race, which I relate to very well, not because I'm fast. Even when I was young, I was slow, and I'm slower still now that I'm a little older, but I am stubborn. And I've run now 9 marathons and so I can relate to this imagery. If you go to a major marathon, go to a big marathon, particularly one that starts in the fall of the year, and not in the first couple of miles, you're going to see all sorts of stuff along the side of the road. There'll be toboggans on the side of the road and jackets on the side of the road and gloves and all sorts of other stuff, because everything you start off wearing you got to carry with you for 26.2 miles. And so what's important is getting to that finish line, and you throw off everything else that gets in the way of the finish line. You throw it aside. So you think about the long run, the marathon, and you throw aside everything that gets in the way of that. Just like the author, throw aside every hindrance and every sin that clings to you. So you're getting ready for the long run, for the marathon, and you think carefully about what you're going to wear. You think carefully about the route you're going to run. So you plan out what you're going to wear. Are those shorts going to chafe me, or the socks going to cause me to blister? Am I eating right before this long run? Am I getting enough sleep? It's important. You got to take care of those things so that you can accomplish what is most important, which is getting to the finish line. That's it. The Christian life is like that long run. You've got a starting point and you've got an ending point, which is the kingdom of God. And so that's where we are. That's where we are. We've got to clear everything away so that we can focus on what's most important. In life, that is our relationship with Christ. That is what is most important. And the writer here refers to the great cloud of witnesses. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, if you read chapter 11, that's the famous Hall of Fame of Faith, and the writer in chapter 11 describes all of the Old Testament saints and prophets who had suffered for their faith and who had persevered. And so look to those people who are the great cloud of witnesses. And I think we can take it further than that. We can take it a little bit further than that. So the writer is all saying, not just all those prophets of old who suffered, but also think about this. All those people around you who are in the same boat as you, look to them and draw from them. One of the things that I'm becoming more and more convinced of is that the Christian life is intended to be lived in community, and that it is nigh on to impossible to live a good Christian life all by yourself. That's going to upset some people, but I'll still stand by it. The Christian life is not intended to be lived all alone. If you think about, to go back to a marathon analogy, the hardest parts of any marathon are the parts where there are no spectators. And the Charleston Marathon there that I've done a couple of times, there's this stretch there from like mile 20 through about 24 where there's nobody there. There's nobody there. There aren't many people. By that point, the field is spread out, so there's not many people running with you, and there are no spectators, and it's tough. It is tough going. And in the Christian life, we need each other. Like I said, I'm becoming more and more convinced that it is just about impossible to live a good Christian life all by yourself. It's not intended to be lived in isolation. We're intended to live it with each other. And John Wesley had a great quote relating to this. I'm going to read it so I give it to you correctly. The gospel of Christ. The solitary religion is not to be found there. So solitary religion is not to be found in the gospel of Christ. And holy solitaries is a phrase no more consistent with the gospel than holy adulterers. The gospel of Christ knows of no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. We in Methodist circles love that phrase, no holiness but social holiness. But if you look at the broader paragraph, Wesley isn't talking about, he's not talking about social justice. There's nothing wrong with social justice, But the point of Wesley's paragraph is that we are supposed to be living the Christian life with each other. So the person who, you might find somebody who says, I can live in my house and never go to church and never associate with other believers and still be a good Christian. Maybe they can, but I have my doubts. Because we are supposed to be meeting with each other and supporting each other, and we are the great cloud of witnesses, just as much as our grandparents and great-grandparents and Isaiah and Jeremiah and all the prophets of old. We, each other, are the great cloud of witnesses. And we can't be as effective as Christians, we can't live the Christian life as well if we huddle up all by ourselves. We need each other. We need each other just as assuredly as in the latter stages of a long run. Any company along the road is good. Any people, whether spectators or fellow runners in the latter stages of a marathon, are so important. You got to have them. You got to have them to give you some drive, because otherwise the steps get longer and longer and slower and slower. And then the writer gives us the real point. Look into Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith. Look into Christ, the author and the perfecter of our faith. And Jesus laid everything aside, was willing to take the shame of the cross so that he would then be glorified at the right hand of the Father. Jesus was willing to take the shame of the cross, and the cross was the most humiliating form of execution that the Romans had. The Romans were past masters at execution and novel ways of killing people, and crucifixion for them was the most humiliating and degrading form of death. And Jesus was willing to take that. He took the humiliation, he took the shame, the punishment, he took all of that. And so Hebrews says, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. Jesus is your example in humility and in suffering. If Jesus was willing to suffer and was humble, then so we should be as well. But it's deeper than that. Not only is Jesus our example, but his suffering was also redemptive for us. Jesus' suffering was an example in how we should be humble and be willing to suffer just as the prophets of old did. But his death, his suffering, was also redemptive. His suffering was for a purpose, and that purpose was to redeem us. And here as we are midway through Holy Week, Maundy Thursdays tomorrow, and then tomorrow night we would normally be gathering in our churches to celebrate Jesus' final meal with his disciples, and then Friday, the day in which he was crucified. We're right in the middle of Holy Week, and let's remember the point behind all of this. That Jesus' death his suffering is an example of how we should be humble and willing to suffer just as the saints of old did. But his death is much more than that. It is for a purpose. It is redemptive. And in his death we have life. And that's it. For us as Christians, we look to Jesus. We look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. He's the one that has run the race before us, and he has run it before us and is waiting for us at the finish line. And let us live the rest of this week and the rest of our lives with that in mind. And I have enjoyed these few minutes and enjoying a cup of coffee with y'all. I guess primarily here in Hamlet, but also wherever you may be watching. And like I said, if you have particular questions or comments about what I've said, just stick them in the comments. And I'll be back, as I used to say, same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow morning.